All right, hello YouTube. Welcome to Dark Tower Palaver. Just barely went live for episode 147. Uh, yeah, ready to dive on into a roundtable. A little bit backwards for the month, of course, but we talked about that, and I will talk about it again on the other side of the announcements, or on the other side of the intro. I mean, during the announcements, as we talk about upcoming episodes, and then of course March. Which we'll be covering at the end of the episode during the Palaver section. So let's go ahead and hit the intro and get started into episode 147.
The Dark Tower by Stephen King. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. Go then. There are other worlds than these. Death, but not for you, gunslinger. It's time we had our own palaver, I think, and it's going to take a while.
And yet, dauntless, the slug horn to my lips I set, and blew. Child Roland to the Dark Tower came.
We are content, one from many. Let the palaver begin.
Hello and welcome to Dark Tower Palaver. This is our podcast covering Stephen King's magnum opus, the Dark Tower series, as well as the wider Stephen King universe, of course, because it is all one level of the tower or the other. So I am Tad, and I'm here ready to dive on into episode Roundtable 147. Let's go ahead and dive on into the announcement, or like the intro stuff real quick, and then we'll pop on through. If you haven't been listening the last couple months, or the last couple weeks, I guess, last couple episodes, you may be a little bit confused as to why we have a roundtable on the second episode of the month, which is usually where our book club episodes are at. I'll talk about that in just a second, but first of all, I want to warn you about spoilers. This is a roundtable, so spoilers will be plentiful throughout the episode. Anything can pop up at any time. So if you haven't finished the 7 primer books of the Dark Tower series, you may want to stick to our book club episodes. In those episodes, we stay where we're at or before. We don't jump ahead, except for a very, very minor and isolated section of the episode at the very end, which we warn you about, so you can't stumble into that. So that is the safest place to listen, though, if you've not finished the series yet. It's always interesting to me to see people on like the social media on Twitter or Reddit or whatever, and they'll be plugged into Dark Tower discussions and they're not finished with the stories yet. That seems insanely risky to me, and it would be the same thing, I guess, to listen to to an episode like this. So that is your warning if you haven't finished the series yet. Next up, if you want to find the show, you can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Spotify, as well as Amazon Music or Audible, as well as any podcasting service of your choice if you are a fan of the traditional podcast services that still exist out there, have existed long before places like Spotify, Amazon, and Audible got into the podcasting game. Next up, if you want to, or on any of those services, if you want to subscribe, rate, and review us, we would appreciate that. That always helps the show. Next up, if you want to join live with the live stream, you can do that over here at youtube.com/darktowerpalaver, as well as we post the old episode, or the live streams go immediately into our archives here, so you can always go back and watch old episodes. We have all the visual stuff on the screen, so if you want to watch as well as listen, or that kind of thing, you could find a lot of the episodes, not all the way back to the beginning, but at least for a couple years we've been doing the YouTube thing, and you can find all the old episodes over here on YouTube. If you want to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications, those are the things to appease the algorithm gods. The things such as Blaine the Mono type creatures that destroy and raise up all different kinds of things. It feeds those horrible creatures to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. But the notification part is handy because I try as hard as I can, if there's ever any kind of shifting that needs to happen, to post it on the social media, as well as the text thing on YouTube. But the notifications are always a good reminder as well, in case you happen to miss all of those. I know social media is getting harder and harder anymore to see the stuff you actually want to see. I know I'm seeing that myself, or the stuff I really enjoy seeing, it seems like is far less compared to all the garbage that is all over the place on social media. So the notifications are a good way for that. If you want to find the show notes, you can do that at darktowerpalaver.com. I'll have all the links to everything I cover in this episode, as well as we have things like the questions for new listeners, and the links to all things Dark Tower Palaver. You can support the show at patreon.com/darktowerpalaver. With that, you get access to the Discord server that you could chat with me and Peter, still on there anytime throughout the between episodes and all that kind of stuff, as well as we have monthly hangouts. I know I'm behind on this month's, but keep an eye on your Patreon feeds. I have one I'm going to be dropping in there soon. I wasn't able to do it live, but I do have something coming for the Patreon listeners for February. And then if you want to contact the show, you can do that at Dark Tower Palaver, show at darktowerpalaver.com is the email address. Again, that's show at darktowerpalaver.com. You can find us over on Facebook at facebook.com/darktowerpalaver. You can find us on Twitter at darktowerpod, as well as on Instagram, darktowerpalaver, all one word, and then Blue Sky is at darktowerpalaver.bsky.social. Of course, very clunky shit on Blue Sky, unfortunately not as easy to use as in terms of naming wise, but it is starting to look a lot more like Twitter, so I'm enjoying that over there as well. So that is the announcement, the normal announcements. The next thing I wanted to cover is, hello, Robert. Welcome in the chat. Welcome to the live stream. But yeah, in case anyone missed all the lineup and the reason that things have changed the way for this month essentially is because starting in 6 days from now is March. And we have decided to make the March Insanity fan vote a annual thing. So that does kick off on March 1st. I almost said May 1st. March 1st, which is 6 days from now. And as part of that, I wanted to be able to unveil the bracket on this episode, so that wouldn't work to have this be in a book club episode. So we've swapped the book club episodes in this episode. So there was 2 book clubs in a row, which means that coming up you have this episode, and then a fortnight from now we will have another episode, which will be another round table, and then a book club at the tail end of March. I do want to call that one out as well, specifically because where we ended up last week means that next episode at the end of March, I mean not next episode as of now, but the next book club episode, which is March, what is that? Let's see, the 9th is the next episode, 23rd, the March 23rd. We'll be doing the book club, and we will be starting the showdown at the Traveler's Rest, one that is very, very popular in the pantheon of the Dark Tower series. Anytime we're talking about highlights for the series, that's always one that comes up. Let's see, where did we end up with March Insanity? Best Dark Tower moment, it actually was the showdown at the Traveler's Rest. That was the one we did last year. I knew it was one of the heavy hitters for that one, but with Eddie Dean in 2022 beating out Oi for most beloved character, I'm always in doubt of myself of who won what polls. So I was worried that Traveler's Rest did not win, but it did indeed win. So it is the most the Dark Tower Palaver side. Our group voted that the most beloved Dark Tower, or the best Dark Tower moment, I guess, not beloved. Beloved was the characters. But best Dark Tower moment, the showdown at the Traveler's Rest, that will be the 23rd of March in our book club series. So I'm looking forward to that quite a bit. I think there was some talk at the tail end of last year that we thought maybe we would get to the showdown at the Traveler's Rest last year. But that was before we realized we had to reduce our percentages for the book clubs once we moved from book 3 to book 4. The size differences of the books, we had to we weren't able to cover as much as we wanted to, as we were doing, like I think 2% and 3%, and we had to draw that back because we were running out of time. So that ended up moving it into this year. So can't wait to get to that. So that is all that stuff. And then let's see, in terms of Also, another thing to be aware of is coming up not too far down the road. We are almost to March, and a couple months after that, we have You Like It Darker coming out, Stephen King's next book, coming out May 21st, 2024. I know that still is a couple months away, but as fast as things are moving, the fact that we're almost to March already is insane. Before we know it, we are going to have our 2024 Stephen King book released. So looking forward to that. Let's go ahead and so like I said, I mentioned earlier that I'm going to go through, do the normal news, odds and ends, all that kind of stuff. And then when we get to the Palaver section, we will unveil the bracket for the March Insanity 2024, which we are this year doing. Let's see, I'm trying to remember the nomenclature. Worst Dark Tower moment. So we did it's kind of the Symmetry 2019, the first year we ever did it. We did Most Hated Dark Tower character, which was Rhea the Coos. Then we had a break. We didn't do him for a while, but then we came back in 2022 with Most Beloved Dark Tower character, kind of the mirror image of that, and that was Eddie Dean beating Oi the Brave by 1 vote. Last year we did Best Dark Tower Moment in 2023, which is Showdown at the Traveler's Rest. So this year is the Worst Dark Tower Moment, will be what we are crowning in 2024. So we will be talking about that bracket at the tail end of the show. I'll go through, we have all the nominations. I have the bracket built out. We'll go through and talk about the whole bracket, talk about the matchups, make some predictions, all that fun stuff. And then the vote will start again on March 1st, and I'll talk more about the details of exactly how that vote's going to go when we talk about all that at the tail end of the episode. So let's go ahead and dive into the news. Also, if there are any hiccups technically, I do want to say I have transitioned the slideshow over to OBS, which is the streaming software. Over the years, we've just used Google Slides, and then we just basically projected that on the screen with like the cameras over it. And now the slides are being controlled kind of the way we've been doing on Geekery Abides. I just finally did the work to actually get this all set up. So hopefully there's no issues. It's not like a completely new. I've been doing it on Geekery Abides since pretty much close to the beginning. But just in case there are any issues, just know it's a little bit different this week than we've ever done before when it comes to visual stuff. It should look very similar, but I'm just talking if anything technical happens. One thing I will, I guess I don't want to pat myself on the back or anything, but one nice thing that I was really happy about with moving over to OBS is they allow custom fonts. So of course I went and downloaded, I forget the name of it, but we of course would call it the Stephen King font. Google does not allow you to use custom fonts on their thing. That was something I wanted to do back in the day, but now with OBS allowing custom fonts, we are now. I did realize the first slide though with the intro stuff where it says roundtable number 147. I could have changed that over to the right font as well, but I forgot on that. But the all the stuff on the screen now, except for a logo, of course, has got the Stephen King like typography, which I enjoy. That's actually a real typography that was just used, and it's funny because we associate it with like all Stephen King, but the more I did some research into it while I was actually trying to find the font for this, it's only actually was used on a couple novels, including It, which I think is why maybe we all associate it with so much with King. But there is very, like when I was finding some websites that were breaking down what font it was, because I wanted to make sure I was downloading the exact right one and not just some fake one or something that someone made on their own or whatever. Sometimes I feel like just going back to the original. And I found this one website that was mentioning that, It, and outside of that, there's very few Stephen King adaptations that actually have that on the cover, that font. So, but of course, It is so iconic that no wonder. And then, of course, Stranger Things riffed on it with their logo. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive in though. The first news thing we got here is Stephen King's Holly is getting an adaptation from a veteran King TV producer. So this is from Eric Eisenberg from Cinema Blend on February 8th, 2024. So this is probably one that we wouldn't be, I don't think any of us would really be surprised about this. In fact, I think when Holly dropped, I remember joking on one episode about, I wonder how long it'll take to get an adaptation signed. I want to say it was The Institute, was that 2019, that ended up getting an adaptation announced before the book was even published. It was like a week before or a couple weeks before. I remember we covered it where it was like, oh, The Institute got, picked up. Yeah, it's 2019. And then the book wasn't even out yet. We hadn't even read the damn thing yet. So I was actually, and that's not uncommon. Of course, The Talisman back in the day, Spielberg bought the rights to that before it was even published. So that's not an uncommon thing. I think a lot of filmmakers probably look at the name Stephen King and understand they probably got something worth adapting on their hands, whether they know what the story is or whatever. And obviously it's not like King writes any losers necessarily. His books are always usually really, really good, even if they're not as commercially successful. Not that he has a lot of books that are flops, but no matter what, it seems like King always has good stuff. So I think filmmakers can just sign up and buy out these rights early. And then I'm trying to remember, let's see, we do have some of the others that got signed. I think Billy Summers was really shortly after it published. But I remember thinking to myself not too long ago that, obviously I've read Holly in its entirety, and it feels like it's a little bit further in the rearview mirror now. It's not like I just read it last week, right? So Holly came out September of 2023. So I remember thinking maybe like in the last, I don't even know, a couple weeks, I remember thinking to myself, man, what the hell is going on with Holly? Like there's been no announcement for an adaptation. So I was just kind of like, that's kind of weird where it's like Institute was before it came out. Billy Summers, I think all the others that have come out have all have adaptations lined up, but I just remember the timelines. And I remember Billy Summers was like within a couple weeks after it published that they announced that adaptation. So, we know Fairy Tale's coming and stuff, but Holly, it was just like, wow, from September to now, that's kind of a gap there that happened. But let's go ahead and dive into this real quick. Robert in the chat says, just finished If It Bleeds. Looking forward to reading Holly in the near future. I usually prefer to read before watching. And so Robert, I think that's actually the most popular. In fact, there was a Reddit post I found not too long ago that was asking that. I don't remember if it was a Stephen King one or just a book one. And I am actually the opposite. If possible, of course, I'm not going to like hold off on something like Holly or whatever, But if there's something that I have access to both things, I actually go watch and then read. And then my reason for that was actually back in the early 2000s, it was Lord of the Rings that did this to me. So I wasn't interested in I still am not highly interested in a lot of fantasy stuff. I know Dark Tower, some people say it's fantasy. And so Lord of the Rings, when it came out, I just wasn't interested. So I skipped the first movie. And then it was actually the day before the second movie came out, my brother and my cousin forced me to watch the extended edition on DVD. And so I watched that and then actually ended up loving it. And then the next day I was able to go watch The Two Towers. But then, of course, there was the insufferable 1 year period between the movies because they were each coming out a year apart. So I had a year between the second movie and the third movie. And in that time, I read the books, and I love the third movie, but I do think I enjoyed it the least of the three, and it's because I had the knowledge of what the books had. So I feel like for me, and I'm not going to say this is for everyone, but for me, it felt like I enjoyed it less because I had the expectations of the book in my head. So I came up with this idea that, you know what, if you watch it and then you read it, you can enjoy both of them to the maximum potential because almost always the book is going to be better. But also you're going to be able to watch it without necessarily worrying about like what is it doing different from the books. So in my mind, it's my strategy of enjoying both. But I will say I'm in the vast minority because I found a Reddit post, and I want to say that I think there was one other person in the entire thing that posted read or watch then read except for me. So versus like maybe 100 people that said that you're what you just said. That's more common, certainly, but I will say for me, I think that the grade A way to enjoy both things is to watch and then read, but to each their own for sure. But that's my backstory as to why I like to, if possible, of course I'm not gonna like delay myself on a new King book, of course, but for instance, like right now though, if I were gonna go I don't know, like, an older one, like It, that's been out for a while now, 2017. If I were a new person coming to it all, I would watch those films and then read the books, and hopefully I would enjoy, or read the book and then hopefully enjoy both to the maximum extent. But yeah, either way, awesome stuff. You'll have to let me know what you think, what you thought of If It Bleeds. Robert, I haven't read that one in a bit, but I remember really enjoying it. You have to let me know what you thought of it though, as well as Holly. When you finally dive in, you'll have to let me know what you think of it there, because I really enjoyed Holly as well. I mean, I adore Holly. I'm glad that she's shown up and all kinds of stuff because she's a wonderful character. But diving into the article here, So Eric, that wrote the article, is talking about how it's always fun when a new King adaptation is announced because we can all speculate on who will star in it, how certain scenes will come to life on screen or not, what changes are going to happen from page to screen. And I have to just say to that, hallelujah, that is pretty much 8 years worth of Dark Tower palaver, whether it be the Dark Tower movie that we led up into for a good chunk of the early years, up through all these other things. It's always such fun talk and speculation to go through and kind of have those conversations. So I do agree with Eric there. But then he goes on and says Jack Bender's film career stretches back into the 1970s, and he is no stranger to King's work. Over a decade ago, he was involved in Under the Dome, the TV series. I would hold that against him personally. Under the Dome was terrible. I got through the first season, but I gave up after that because it was not good. But just to give him all the credit here, after that he was then involved in the Mr. Mercedes series, which I think is absolutely incredible. It was very well done. So he has some good stuff as well, but also he did produce a couple of the episodes of The Outsider for HBO, which is probably one of the best King adaptations in the last 10-15 years. So he definitely has his experience in the Stephen King realm for sure. He is also developing a film adaptation for the mini book Elevation, as well as he is also signed on. He is the one that is currently owns the rights and is attempting to do a limited series version of The Institute, which we actually just mentioned a bit ago that The Institute sold before it was even published. Well, it is Jack Bender here that has those rights, as well as he has the rights apparently to Elevation, and he did a couple episodes of The Outsider and Mr. Mercedes and Under the Dome. So a lot of stuff for Stephen King wise. He is of course no Mick Garris in terms of quantity, but he certainly in the modern era, there's not a lot of people that have done that much Stephen King work. He is now adding an adaptation of the book Holly to that list. So he actually did a Q&A back in September at Chicago's Printer Row Lit Fest. And he was talking about working with Stephen King. So the funny thing is just to mention that it's taken a while to announce this, but apparently this Q&A happened back in September. I don't know why it didn't really hit the internet until just now, but I know that I actually went through our archive of my show notes and stuff to see did we cover this and I just forgot back in September, and I couldn't find anything anywhere. So even if it happened back in September, it seems like it's only hitting the internet very recently. But he says, quote, it's the joy of telling stories and the making of that with a group of people. That's one of the best things about making television, when you're working with great people on material you care about. Then he goes on and says, I've been fortunate to know and work with Stephen King. Talking about writers, his new book Holly, by the way, is great. We're going to make a show out of that. We haven't announced it yet. So it's obviously then he was basically announcing it. So the fact that I actually didn't do the research. I actually should have. I only thought of it just now. I should have looked up when he was at this Printers Row Lit Fest, and actually seen date wise, because I wonder if he actually signed this before it was published, because what did I say? Holly was September 5th. So if it was in September, he's probably shortly after the publication. So maybe it is very similar to Billy Summers, or within weeks of it being published, he had the rights to it. But we didn't get the normal Vanity Fair article announcement, all that kind of stuff that we normally get with these signings. We're only finding about this months later. So then the interviewer asked if she and the crowd had just been given a scoop, and he said, quote, a bit. And I would say that, yeah, I think that more so than a bit, because even here in February 24th, 2024, and we're hearing about this for the first time. So yeah, definitely a scoop. Eric goes on to give a huge credit to Cynthia Erivo and her turn as Holly in The Outsider. But he figures with Bender's history, it is more likely that Justina Lupe would probably be his choice in terms of casting, since he was so heavily involved with Mr. Mercedes. I would also add to that as well, Justine Lupe was also I wouldn't say a star, but she was one of the bigger supporting characters in the massively successful show Succession. And I think so maybe her star power is a little bit higher now than it probably was when she did Mr. Mercedes. I think I mentioned that back when she also did the audiobook narration of Holly as well. And I remember mentioning that, we were lucky to get her narrating. I mean, she obviously said she had a connection to the character and she wanted to narrate it. But I think that her star power now versus what it was previous to Succession hitting the air of HBO is a lot elevated. So I also think that actually speaks maybe more so to her potentially reprising the role of Holly from the Mr. Mercedes show, because now she could kind of be the star rather than I'm blanking on his name, the guy that played Bill Hodges, Mr. Mercedes, let's see, TV series. See if I can get it pulled up quicker than someone in the chat. Brendan Gleeson. Brendan Gleeson, of course, he's a massive star. He just had a turn in an Oscar-winning movie, an Oscar-nominated movie. So he's obviously huge, and he's been around for forever, done a lot of stuff, but he certainly was one of the bigger stars of that show. But now here, fast forwarding into 2024, I think Justine, with her turn in Succession, has the star power now to potentially actually carry the show a little bit beyond just the fact that Stephen King's name's on it. That, of course, is plenty of weight to add to a show. But it gives it a little bit more star power than maybe it would have been if she hadn't been in the show Succession. So then he goes on and says we probably need to be patient because he is currently working on the horror series called From. And then he goes on and Bender says, another quote from him, he says, quote, "I'm also doing this book, The Institute, when I finish From. But Stephen King is a remarkable guy. He's a guy in a t-shirt and a hat. He's the least pretentious genius I've ever met." So that's awesome to hear. I mean, of course, we know we've seen pictures of Stephen King in like a suit and tie, but we've also seen a number of pictures of him just in flannels and jeans and hats and Ramones t-shirts and all that kind of stuff too. So that's awesome. But he is saying that once From wraps, though, he does say that also the book, he's going to be doing the book The Institute first. That's his highest priority. So that's actually kind of an interesting news story within a news story here. While he is signing on to do Holly, it does sound like The Institute, which of course was signed to him back in 2019. That is the next thing on his docket. So we might be seeing the Institute adaptation coming on down the road a little bit sooner than later. I also did just realize I forgot to bring over the big board, our adaptation board, to the new OBS slideshow. So I don't have that to show off right now. I do remember editing it to show Holly. Actually, let me see. Maybe I can because with this I can actually kind of edit on the fly a little bit, but let me see if I actually saved my saved the damn thing, and I don't know that I did. Nope, that is all. Okay, so I think I remember updating it in the old slideshow, but I forgot to actually save that picture and bring it over to this one. So I apologize about that. But of course, the big addition to it will be that Holly is now a film adaptation, because that is the other thing that I didn't want to overlook as well, because it's so easy to kind of lose track of the fact. Wait, does it say film actually? Yeah, let me see. I'm fortunate enough to be working with Stephen King. Joyous to tell the story. His new book, Holly, by the way, is great. I'm going to make a show out of that. Never mind. I'm sorry, not film, show. So that is going to be a television show, which is interesting as well. Probably maybe a miniseries. Yeah, sorry. I maybe I even put it in the wrong spot. So maybe I'm glad I don't have that slide on hand right now. And then Robert says the Institute is going to be so much fun to watch. I agree. I can't wait to see that one. I'm probably still a little bit of ways from revisiting it, because with that one, me and Peter both ended up reading it, and then we decided we were going to do a deep dive into it for the show back in 2019. So we both ended up rereading it within probably a month of reading it the first time, and I will say nothing against the book, but reading it twice in a row in about a month time, that was a lot. So I was kind of ready to move on from it at that point. Not that it's bad, just that's a lot to. I mean, even The Shining, or the Shining, I'm sorry, even The Stand, my all-time favorite book, and singular book, because of course Dark Tower doesn't count. That's a collective of books. My favorite singular Stephen King book, The Stand, I read once a year, but even there, that's like 11, 12 months apart. whereas reading something a month, that's a condensed time period to read a book. But I did really enjoy it, and the fact that I was able to read it so soon after reading it the first time does speak to its quality. I can't wait for it. I think that was classic Stephen King. The kids, portraying kids as well as King does. And I think it's going to be great. I feel like it's a perfect mixture of a lot of different things we've seen over the years. It felt very Firestarter. Of course, we all thought some Dark Tower stuff with Breakers. Not that ended up being a thing, but then it also felt kind of like the Talisman a little bit, having like the young underage kid on this journey that's probably way above his age level. It had all that. There's just a lot of cool stuff with it. I can't wait to see it. So I agree though. The Institute will be cool. I am quite excited that while covering that news story in the middle, at the tail end of it, getting confirmation from the man himself that the next thing on his docket is the Institute was pretty exciting, because hopefully that means that we'll be seeing it in the next year and a half or so, maybe. I also don't know I don't know much about it. I know it's a horror series. I've heard its reputation is pretty good, but I don't know where they're at, if they've wrapped their final season or anything, or if they still have work to do on that. So maybe it's still 2 or 3 years away, unfortunately. But the fact that it's not backburnered is always wonderful, because if I had the board to show on screen right now, it is pretty common to have announcements of something and then years later to have no update on it. I remember even seeing something on one of the social media things, people asking if I just blanked on it. Ben Stiller still had the rights to Rat from If It Bleeds, I believe, wasn't it? People were asking if he still had the rights to that, because obviously we heard the announcement for it way back, whatever that was. If It Bleeds came out in 2020. So yeah, maybe 2020 when that came out. That was around that time it was announced, and we haven't heard a bloody thing about it since then. That's 4 years ago. But of course, with the pandemic, with the logjam of stuff because of the pandemic, and then the strikes, there's a lot of stuff where 4 years of radio silence is not as alarming to me when you consider an entire year of that was lost to COVID. Another chunk of a year was lost to the strikes. And then the logjam of stuff because of those things. It's not at all alarming to me that we haven't heard anything on Rat. But it is very interesting to get updates on stuff, because things can just drag on and we don't know what's going on, and we get nervous and we want to see them progress. Okay, so next up. Let's go on over to the next article here. And this one is Blumhouse is launching a horror exhibit at the Shining Hotel in Colorado, which that is literally what it says, is the Shining Hotel. So this has been interesting because over the last year or so, we've been covering a number of different things. We covered, there was first the auction of the dude that won the axe for something in the six figures range. He won the actual axe from the Shining movie. And then a month later, we covered that he actually donated it to the institute that basically has is building a film element to Estes Park's, the Stanley Hotel at Estes Park. And they're doing all this stuff, and he basically donated the axe that he won in that auction to that, and they're building all kinds of stuff to be kind of a film thing. Like they're going to have some studio stuff, and they're kind of building some stuff to their attraction base for people. And then of course we heard that it was also just sold recently, or it's about to be sold. And then now this just feels like the next shoe to drop is, it sounds like Blumhouse, which is probably one of the biggest names, if not the biggest name in horror right now, is basically teaming up with the Stanley. So let's go ahead and jump in here. This is by Aaron Couch from The Hollywood Reporter on January 26, 2024. And he recaps his Blumhouse, the horror studio, famous for things like Get Out and Megan. But I added into that, of course, the last Halloween trilogy and Five Nights at Freddy. And even that just feels like we're very shortchanging them, because their horror library is quite extensive over the last 10 years or so. So they're extending beyond the realm of film. It says they are launching a new exhibit at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. They will curate over 10,000 square feet of the Stanley Film Center exhibit space in collaboration with the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media. The exhibit is described as a, quote, mini Academy museum dedicated to horror, and will draw from Blumhouse's extensive catalog of film, television, and video game offerings. And then another quote here. We have a quote here. This is from the governor of Colorado. It says, "Here's Blumhouse. This iconic Colorado hotel will now have a new element of fun and fright for Coloradians." I've never heard that word before. It's always interesting to think of other states and how you refer to the people of those states. Coloradans, maybe is maybe how it's pronounced, and visitors across the world to enjoy, driving tourism and strengthening our economy, said Governor Jared Polis in a statement. And then we have a quote from Jason Blum, the head of Blumhouse. He says the Stanley Hotel is hallowed ground for horror fans, and that makes this presence at the Stanley Film Center a natural extension for Blumhouse. Fans are going to get a closer look than ever before of their favorite films, though they may want to keep their distance on a few quote items in our collection. So yeah, if you ever want to go and check out like Blumhouse's website, they have a list of all their films and it is quite extensive. I'm really excited for this. I think this is just turning into a wonder. I mean, not that the Stanley wasn't already a wonderful place to go check out as a horror fan, as a Stephen King fan, whatever, but it just feels like they're adding more and more stuff to it. And I more and more, this seems like a place to visit for sure. So that's really cool. Can't wait to see what Blumhouse has in store for The Shining Hotel, which of course is the Stanley, as well as we know that you will be able to go and see the actual acts used by Mr. Jack Nicholson in the film, the 1980 film, The Shining. Okay, so next up, and this is a fun one here. This one is 10 great Stephen King movie castings that could have been. And this is actually covers. There's one of them in here that was also kind of hitting the news recently. I think it was Stephen King said something. So this kind of covers that as well, but it's very interesting because as just a big movie fan, I always love like what ifs, like what could have happened. And some of these are, I mean, I would say most of these are, well, no, not most of them. There's a couple of these that are like alarming and it's like, what the fuck, this would have been terrible. Other ones are like, oh my God, what could have been? And then some of them are just, revelations of like, holy shit, I can't believe that was a thought. So this is starting off here. This is by Ben Gibson from Screen Rant on January 23rd, 2024. So he says King adaptations have varied in quality over the years, but small changes in castings could have had huge impacts on various films over the years. He says this is exploring the other people who are up for huge roles in Stephen King adaptations. And again, this is a top 10, so let's go ahead and dive on in. The first one at number 10. That is the wrong button. There we go. I have I got the little pedal thing to help trigger things, and there's 3 pedals on it, and I just accidentally hit the wrong pedal. So, yes, the first one is Melanie Griffith as Carrie, and the note on this says, while Sissy Spacek was universally praised for her performance in Carrie, the movie could have easily starred another young actress who auditioned for the part. Melanie Griffith, before Carrie, Griffith had appeared opposite Gene Hackman in the film Night Moves, but she didn't rise to prominence until 1984 when she starred in the Brian De Palma Body Double. Melanie Griffith proved herself to be a very capable young actress and continued to appear in films today, but had she landed the role of Carrie, it would have been an interesting change. And I can't, I don't know. I couldn't imagine. Some of these are just really hard. I mean, this is not the hardest one to imagine, but this is just, it's really hard to imagine not having Sissy Spacek in the role. Of course, it's the oldest Stephen King movie. It was the first one to come out. But it's just one of those ones where it's like, man, what the fuck? Like, not, but yeah, definitely an interesting choice. Robert in the chat says too sexy to be Carrie. And then the heart eye emoji. Yeah, indeed. It's just a very, very different, I don't know. I think that it's so hard to get over the idea of Sissy Spacek because I feel like she embodied that role so much that, like, I don't think I've ever, I mean, of course there was the remake in 2013, a readaptation. I know I hate the term remake for something that's based off a book because it's not really remaking the original movie so much as adapting the original source material. But, aside from that 2013 movie, I don't think I've ever even allowed another thought for Carrie in my mind outside of Sissy Spacek. Every time I've read it, it's been her. Anytime I just imagine like any element of it, it's always her. I've never, it's just so hard. I can't even picture the actor that played her in the 2013 one. It's 100% Sissy Spacek. So it's very interesting to imagine. Like I said, this isn't the hardest one to imagine. in my head, but there's one on here that I would equate to trying to imagine somebody else playing Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. And I know, of course, Brian Cox played him in the Manhunter movie, and then Mads Mikkelsen has played him recently in the Hannibal show, recently in the last decade. So there's been other actors that have portrayed that role, but of course the most iconic turn for the character is Silence of the Lambs, and trying to imagine anyone but Anthony Hopkins playing that role is just unfathomable to me. But the next one here, and this is actually the one, let me make sure I've got this lined up right. This next one here is actually the one that was kind of the revelation recently. I think King said something that kind of gave people the idea that this was King's idea. And it is John Candy as Billy Halleck. And so this is from Stephen King's Thinner. I guess there was like a subtitle that tells you what movie it's from, but I felt most of these are pretty obvious. But this one, of course, I would point out because I don't know if Thinner is as iconic as things like Carrie and some of the others. So Stephen King's Thinner follows a man who is cursed to rapidly lose weight, but once he sheds the extra pounds, the remaining weight has to come off somewhere. During a commentary track on the film, a producer revealed, so that's what it was. I feel like this all just came out recently because, which actually makes sense because there was the Thinner got a remastered edition, just came out very recently, so that kind of makes sense that this news came out because that commentary is probably new for that release. It says during the commentary track for the film, producer revealed that King's originally wanted comedy legend John Candy to star as a protagonist, but after reaching out, they never got a response. However, right around the time the film was being made, Candy's health was in rapid decline, leading to his untimely demise in 1994. The film was released in 1996, but failed to generate many positive responses. So, very interesting. I just read Thinner in the last probably 6 months or so. I can't remember which one I actually, never mind. I had a little spell where I went through a lot of the Bachman books, but I think Thinner actually predated that. I think I just read that one as an unread one, but still was within the last 6 months. So that one's still fresh in my mind. Of course, this is back in the 90s. I don't know how they would have dealt with a larger actor like John Candy if he wasn't in failing health, and they could have signed him to it. I don't know what they would have done to have him lose weight. I actually haven't seen Thinner, so I need to check it out. But I kind of just assumed they would have got a thinner actor and then put him in a fat suit or something. And then that way you can kind of do the special effects to quote unquote to make him thinner. I don't know how you would have done that with someone like John Candy. Oh, excuse me. So next one, and this one actually is interesting to me because this actor still in my mind is defined by this almost casting. I cannot see this guy's name without considering this, even though he never played the role, and that is and I apologize, I don't know how to say his name exactly, but is it Will Poulter? He's been in a lot of stuff over the last little while. He's been hitting it a little bit bigger recently. But Will Poulter was almost cast as Pennywise the Clown in the 2017, what was eventually the 2017 version, but with the previous director. So it goes on. Let me read his note here. Initially, Cary Fukunaga was set to direct in 2017, direct the 2017 adaptation of one of King's most popular novels, It. Fukunaga had several potential options for the terrifying clown that haunts Derry, but eventually settled on Will Poulter after seeing an outstanding audition for the part. Poulter was set to move forward with the project, but when Fukunaga stepped down as director, Poulter also left the project and moved on to new roles in the following years. The performance of Bill Skarsgård was faultless, but it would have been interesting to see Poulter lean into the malevolent villainous role. And yeah, this one, like I said, it's probably because he wasn't one that I was known. I didn't know him very much, but it was while we were doing this podcast, I remember, and I don't even know if we were covering extensive Stephen King stuff or just Dark Tower stuff at the time. But I remember reading this, and I remember kind of looking him up, and then whatever, and it just kind of seared in my brain where it's like, okay, this is going to be our Pennywise. And then so now as that fell through, and then as time goes, I mean, even he was just in the third Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And I remember when that was announced, I'm like, oh, Pennywise. Even though he never played Pennywise, it's just absolutely seared into my brain for him. So would have been interesting though. Cary Fukunaga obviously just did a Bond movie. He has been one of the main directors for the recent Masters of the Air, the new Spielberg and Hanks World War II show, following up Band of Brothers and the Pacific. He's been one of the primary directors, if not the only director. I can't say I've paid 100% attention, but I feel like every time I've caught a name on the credits, it's always been Cary Fukunaga. So very interesting. And this next one is actually somehow one that completely got by me back because this is actually the same role, and it is Pennywise. Let me find the right slide. There we go. And it is Ben Mendelsohn as Pennywise the clown. And the note here says even earlier in the creative process, Fukunaga had looked to slightly older actors to fill the part as Pennywise. Following on from the 1990 version starring Tim Curry, more refined actors who had proven their ability to play a convincing villain were being offered the part. Perhaps most notably Ben Mendelsohn, whose popularity on the silver screen had grown in recent years, was offered the part but left for unknown reasons. Anyone tackling such a unique character would have had to deliver their own spin on the role, so seeing Mendelsohn's take on Pennywise would have been a treat. And I absolutely agree. There's very few people in modern Hollywood right now that I absolutely adore as much as Ben Mendelsohn. We're talking about Holly, and of course you can't talk about Holly without talking about The Outsider, which he of course played a role in, and he did a great job in that. And everything Ben Mendelsohn's been in that I've seen him in recently, I've absolutely adored. I love the dude, and I can only imagine what he would have done with Pennywise the clown. So that one, as much as I knew Will Poulter, Ben Mendelsohn is a new one to me, but is not unwelcomed. That would be a very interesting casting job for sure. Next up, getting into the more iconic realm, and this one is not as unthinkable to me as Anthony Hopkins, but it is definitely a tough one to imagine, and it is Robert De Niro as Jack Torrance. So yeah, this is crazy. I mean, to me though, it's hard to imagine not having Jack Nicholson, but at the same time being such a fan of the book. Jack Nicholson is basically crazy all the time because he's Jack Nicholson, and that's one of the things I did dislike about the Kubrick film. I mean, I love the film for what it is. It's a classic, but in terms of when I look at it and judge it upon being an adaptation of Stephen King's brilliant novel, it fails pretty hard, and a big part of that is because, Jack Nicholson's pretty much crazy from frame number one. Robert De Niro, on the other hand, is a guy that can play crazy, but also can play very a normal person, so I think this is a very intriguing one to me. So the note here, recently, Robert De Niro has enjoyed it says recently, Robert De Niro has enjoyed a long and illustrious career in Hollywood, but one of the earliest projects, I don't know why he says recently, beginning of that, doesn't really attach to anything here, but one of the earliest projects that could have been a great step up in his career eventually went to Jack Nicholson. Originally, Stanley Kubrick wanted to have De Niro play Jack Torrance in The Shining, but it was after seeing his performance in Taxi Driver that he decided to go with Nicholson. Taxi Driver is so often cited as one of De Niro's best films, but Kubrick had a very different version for his movie. Despite this, casting De Niro would have made for another special adaptation. And I agree. And again, who knows if Kubrick's whole idea was to basically have him crazy from the beginning, maybe he would have just had De Niro play it up too, and there would have really not been any difference in terms of my complaints. But still, I mean, Robert De Niro is one of the greatest actors of all time. I just recently caught a theatrical screening of Godfather 2, which is, of course, Robert De Niro in 1974. Playing the young Don Corleone. It is hitting its 50-year anniversary, and as such, they were putting it out in theaters, and I, of course, was not going to miss that opportunity, so I went and saw it. So Robert De Niro, that's fresh in my mind for Mr. De Niro. But yeah, him as Jack Torrance is an interesting thought because, I could just imagine. Again, if Kubrick's idea wasn't to have crazy from the frame number one, I think this could have been an absolutely insane I guess what the movie we could have got out of this would have probably been pretty insane, because I do think that De Niro could play that more refined, normal human being, but then slowly go nuts over the course of the film, kind of like he does in the book. So very interesting one indeed. Next one, number 5, is Tom Hanks as Andy Dufresne. So this is an interesting one for sure. But this is actually one that I don't necessarily hate. Of course, Tim Robbins is probably his most iconic role as Andy Dufresne. I think he plays the role perfectly. But of course, Tom Hanks is a very talented and brilliant actor, and he was probably at his most powerful in the mid '90s. So this would have been Tom Hanks at his Academy Award nomination winning best, and I could absolutely see him playing this role for sure. But it says legendary actor Tom Hanks was already fast becoming a major Hollywood name by the time The Shawshank Redemption was being made, and apparently he was one of the top contenders for the leading role. Tim Robbins excelled as the highly intelligent man trapped in prison, but Hanks had to turn the role down due to his commitment to making Castaway. Both films went on to major success, but had the leading actors been switched, it would have been interesting to see how differently the stories could have played out. And yeah, I mean, I can see. I mean, I'm just trying to think of some of like the scenes, and of course, Tim plays. There's like sometimes Andy's a very quiet, reserved person, so I think that's you have to be kind of more nuanced and stuff. And I don't think there's anything there that tells me that Tom Hanks couldn't have played that brilliantly. But yeah, that would be an interesting one though, man, because again, you're talking about Tim Robbins, I feel like is so iconic in The Shawshank Redemption. Like as iconic as that movie is, a big part of it is him in that role. So as much as I think Tom could pull it off, man, it's really hard to imagine the movie poster with anyone other than Tim Robbins on it. So that's an interesting one for sure. Next up, number 4. And this one is Michael McKean as the narrator in Stand By Me. This starts off as Stand By Me as one of the most highly regarded films of the 1980s, and a departure from King's typical stories to such an extent that many people are unaware of the source material being a novella by Stephen King. When the film was being made, director Rob Reiner was looking to cast the perfect person for the role of the narrator, who frames the story, and eventually settled on Richard Dreyfuss. But an early contender was Michael McKean, whom Reiner had worked with for This Is Spinal Tap. McKean would have brought something very different to the role. Of course, yeah, Spinal Tap's in my mind, but of course I can't imagine Mr. McKean now without the Better Call Saul performances of the last decade. Yeah, definitely would have been different. I think this one's a little bit easier to picture because the narrator is not on screen often. It's more of a vocal performance. Of course, he's on screen a bit, but not much. So this one, it's more of just like a different voice for the most part, but definitely very interesting. And it makes total sense. I think at times I tend to blank on the fact that Rob Reiner was the director of This Is Spinal Tap. So I don't know why those two things just disconnect. I think like directing Stand By Me, there's just part of me that's like, there's no way that This Is Spinal Tap and Stand By Me are the same guy. It's kind of like Babe, Pig in the City, and Mad Max, the Mad Max movies being the same guy. There's just certain times where it's just so hard, and I get it. These artists are very talented and they vary in what they can and can't do. But I just, yeah, there's something about This Is Spinal Tap and Stand By Me that just don't feel right to me, being the same person. Next one, number 3. This one is Angelica Houston as Annie Wilkes, and this one here, guys, is the one that is the Hannibal Lecter not being Anthony Hopkins, because Annie Wilkes being anyone other than Kathy Bates is absolutely just unfathomable to me. I could not imagine it. I mean, but the thing is I get it, right? Because she was pretty much unknown. I think she had only done stage work. I don't think she'd even worked in film before Misery. But it goes it goes on with the notes here. It says it's almost impossible to imagine anyone else in the role of Annie Wilkes. Indeed, in the film Misery, but Kathy Bates was not the first person to be offered the role. Bates was relatively unknown at the time of her casting, and ahead of her landing the role, another actress was offered the part but had a scheduling conflict. Angelica Houston, who appeared as Morticia in The Addams Family and the Grand High Witch in The Witches, could have played the obsessed Wilkes. Both Bates and Houston are very different actors, and it could have resulted in a very different picture. And I will say, too, the other thing is the fact that Kathy Bates, I almost said Annie Wilkes, because, again, they're fucking one and the same. Like, when I see Anthony Hopkins, he's a brilliant, talented actor that's done a lot of roles, but when I see him, I think Hannibal Lecter. And when I see Annie Wilkes, Kathy Bates, I think Annie Wilkes. Like, that role is so iconic, they're just fused together to me. And that's not to speak ill of their overall careers. It's just sometimes a role is so iconic, it's hard to break away from it. Usually that happens in television. When you're like an iconic actor in an iconic TV show, it's really hard for people to break out and not see you as Kramer from Seinfeld type thing. You know what I mean? It's hard to, for some actors, they end up basically not having a great career later in their life because they can't ever get out from under their iconic roles. That was not the case for Anthony Hopkins or Kathy Bates, but I do think that those roles are so iconic for both of them. But yeah, I think what works so well for Kathy is that she was unknown. So I think that like her being, I think just that added to like the mystique of Annie Wilkes and like the way that movie played out. I think, you know, if that had been a more known actor, I think that could have may not have worked out as well. So, and then the next one here is actually the same movie, just a different part, and that is Al Pacino as Paul Sheldon. Of course, we had James Caan was the original Paul Sheldon, and again, just freshly coming off of watching Godfather 2. That is basically two Corleone brothers potentially being in the same role, either Sonny Corleone, which got the role, but Michael Corleone, Al Pacino almost got the role of Paul Sheldon, which is insane to think about. Let's go ahead and read what his note is on this. It says, compound that with the fact that Paul Sheldon, the famous author whom Wilkes imprisoned, could have been a different actor as well, and the entire movie would have been unrecognizable. James Caan did a brilliant job as Sheldon, but the role was offered to a wide variety of actors before he was eventually chosen. One of those actors of note was Al Pacino, who was well established by the time of Misery's filming and could have offered a different interpretation of the trapped writer. Indeed, I mean, I'm a huge Al Pacino fan, but man, it's really hard to imagine anyone but James Caan in the role of Paul Sheldon. And again, maybe that's just watching the movie so much, but Al's an actor that I love, so I'm not going to speak ill of him at all, because I think as much as it's hard to imagine it, I do think that Al probably could have pulled off something pretty cool with it. And then the last one is number one is the one that I would speak ill of because I was never a fan of this. And it is Russell Crowe as Roland Deschain. I know that, you know, Russell Crowe is a very well-established, Academy Award nominated, at least. I don't remember if he won it for Gladiator or not. But he's a very he's a great actor for sure. I've just never been the biggest fan of him outside of Gladiator. And him as Roland is probably the darkest time in the 12 years of developmental hell that we had. There was a number of different names that were attached, rumored to be attached at certain points, and Russell Crowe is for me the darkest days of the of that whole period. Of course, eventually it went on to become Javier Bardem was the next person I think that they had rumored to be cast as Roland after Russell Crowe. I was more open to that one, but Russell Crowe, I've never liked this idea. It goes on here and says at one point in the 2017 version of The Dark Tower was set to be directed by Ron Howard, who had a clear vision for the fantasy epic adaptation. Howard's top choice for the leading man of Roland Deschain was Russell Crowe, who he'd worked on with several projects before. But with changes behind the scenes, the film ultimately had a very different creative team, and Idris Elba landed the lead. The movie would have been very different had the original cast and crew continued, with Crowe as the star. I'm just, again, I'm not, it's not that he's a bad actor, he just doesn't do it for me outside of Gladiator. I love him in Gladiator. But more often than not, when it's not Gladiator that I'm watching, I'm not overly fond of Mr. Russell Crowe. So that one's one I'm definitely aware of. Like I said, I remember Javier Bardem being a rumor after that. And then as we got closer, we obviously got Idris Elba. Of course, the biggest fan casting way back in the earliest days of the dream casting was always, I just blanked on his name. The guy who played Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. Viggo Mortensen. He was a very famous or very popular fan casting back in the IMDb message board days. I remember that because we were just fresh off of Lord of the Rings, so he was big on everyone's mind. So a lot of people were picking him for Roland. I still see him picked every once in a while. I will say I was not a fan of it back then just because it was too damn popular, and it just felt so... I don't want to say it's typecasting because I don't think Aragorn and Roland were the same person, but it just felt like, you're like, I mean, if a King doesn't write high fantasy necessarily, but I feel like the closest that he's ever come to high fantasy is Dark Tower. So the idea that, he'd go from Aragorn in Lord of the Rings to Roland in Dark Tower, it just didn't work. It just didn't jive for me. But the more I've heard it in the last couple years, the more I'm like, I could actually get on board with that now, because I think there's enough time differentiated there, and he's no longer just like, if you got 10 people dream casting and 9 of them say Viggo Mortensen, that kind of also drives me crazy a little bit, because again, not to say that it's even the wrong casting, but sometimes I get a little punk rock, and I kind of want to fight against the the most popular choices. So, but yeah, that was more of a dream casting. But yeah, I remember Russell Crowe and Javier Bardem being the big ones that were rumored to be attached as Roland Deschain before we finally got Idris Elba. Next up, we've got the Stevens. Stephen King and Steven Spielberg almost teamed up for a haunted house movie. And this is by Chris Evangelista. I always have a hard time with his name. From Slash Film on February 17th, 2024. And I know the soundbite is more from the Geekery Abide side, but I will say Steven Spielberg, Stephen King.
Just hook it to my veins.
Like, come on, man. I mean, they're both still working dudes, so maybe we could still see it happen. But please, God, give me a Stephen King and Steven Spielberg team up. That would be amazing. Let's see. David just popped in the chat, says my impression of Sean Connery reading The Dark Tower. Shimi very well. And I read that, of course, as Shimi from, book 4. That's great. I love that. Sean Connery, of course, one of the easiest accents to make fun of outside of maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's probably the easiest accent to make fun of. But Sean Connery is certainly up there for sure. So this going on here into this article here, Chris talks about how Steven and Steven, of course I have them spelled differently, but and audibly you're hearing the same thing basically, are two artists at the top of their fields. King is one of the best-selling authors of all time, and Spielberg is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. He then asks, how is it these two men have never worked together? And then he says ends up saying, it's not for a lack of trying, as these two have come close to teaming up several times over the years. So when Stephen King was working on Poltergeist, he actually wanted help on the script by Stephen King, which in my mind, like, I can only imagine. I mean, I love Poltergeist. It's one of my favorites. I mean, Toby Hooper directed it, but Spielberg was producing it, and he was very heavily invested. So much so that there's still people I'll hear that'll be like, oh yeah, Steven Spielberg directed the Poltergeist. It's like, no, he didn't. But he was obviously involved. Can you imagine just that convergence? Steven Spielberg, Stephen King, and Toby Hooper that did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That would be quite the trifecta. Not that Poltergeist isn't already an incredible and iconic movie, but I can only imagine what would have happened if King had got his fingers on that script. And then he ends up pulling a quote from Stephen King from an EW interview from 2018, and he says, quote, "It didn't work out because it was before the internet and we had a communication breakdown." So that's unfortunate, but definitely something I can see back in the pre-internet, pre-cell phone days when, if you're not at home, you don't get your phone call that somebody might be ringing up and stuff. So that's kind of a bummer, because I can only imagine what having some Stephen King mojo rubbed on that screenplay would have looked like. I don't know if that was like a rewrite or if that was the full script they wanted him to write, but either way, that would have been something else, man. I do wonder if King would have still had that clown doll that was so iconic from Poltergeist. Then going on, it says, then there was The Talisman, which Steven Spielberg bought the rights to before it was even published, but no film or TV series ever ended up coming from it for 3 decades, which we only recently saw the end of that we covered it on the show, where the Duffer Brothers now are teaming up with Steven Spielberg to adapt it for After Stranger Things for Netflix. So Steven Spielberg is technically still involved, but it's obviously been over 30 years since he bought the rights to that book, and nothing has ever come of it. So that is unfortunate, but it says, we have another quote from Stephen King. Actually, it's from the same EW interview. It says, several times he came very close to making it, and there were a lot of discussions about that. And that's all he really says. So there's really no further explanation as to why that didn't happen. Of course, not to say that Steven Spielberg has not been a very, very busy person in that time period from the mid 80s through the 90s and into the 2000s. I mean, when you go look at the filmography of Steven Spielberg, it's pretty insane. I still cannot wrap my head around the fact that while he was he directs Jurassic Park and he's editing Jurassic Park, and while editing Jurassic Park, he is filming Schindler's List. Like, that is insane to me. I can't imagine what that looked like and what that would be emotionally for someone to have to go through all that at once. And not to mention obviously the gravity of what Schindler's List is. Then it goes on and says, then there was finally Rose Red. The closest we ever came to getting them collaborating together was for this. So Rose Red ended up being a TV series in 2002 that was a spin on Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House. But before that finally came to be, though, it was actually going to be a Steven Spielberg film in the 1990s, according to Stephen Jones's book Creepshow, the illustrated Stephen King movie guide. It was meant to be a $40 million budget haunted house film written by Stephen King and directed by Steven Spielberg. And then it says, quote, Stephen and I tried to work together on a couple occasions. What happened with Rose Red was that he stayed in touch and asked if I still wanted to do a haunted house story, King had told Fangoria. So basically they were both workaholics. King wrote King wrote, but every was writing scripts basically for this team up. But every time he turned in a draft to Steven Spielberg, he had a bunch of new ideas and he wanted more changes. King ended up writing 3 drafts, and Steven Spielberg still wanted more changes. King said Spielberg wanted, quote, a bigger, more positive kind of feeling, or a bigger, more positive kind of feeling. And then it says, then King went on to say that he wanted to, quote, scare the shit out of people. And they both eventually realized that they had completely different visions of the project. And so they both kind of broke ranks from each other and moved on from it. Spielberg went on to produce the lousy 1990 remake of The Haunting. And the script that King wrote sat in a drawer until he finally fished them out, polished up a script for them, and then he actually went and pitched it. And he pitched it. It was a good pitch, but unfortunately, the pitch was on June 18th, 1999. Just again, let me read that one more time. June 18th, 1999. I think all of us constant readers know what happens the next day on June 19th, 1999. Especially as Dark Tower fans, we know full well what happens on June 19th, 1999. So yes, he had a very, very successful pitch for Rose Red, pitching it as a miniseries, and the next day he went for a walk and was hit by a van. So we know what happened, of course. So then King, of course, took a long time to recover. By the time he recovered, he ended up moving forward with it, and the ended up getting it filmed, made, released on television in 2002. And so then the last thing that he says in the article here is maybe they can try again because they are both still working. So again, yes, please, let's try to work on that and get something going. Although I will say that maybe the personalities just won't work, because I do think that Spielberg tends to be a little bit more positive and upbeat, whereas King tends to be a little bit more dark and macabre. So maybe the two aren't gonna like jive as well. I mean, at the same time, Poltergeist, it makes me wonder, but again, Poltergeist wasn't directed by Spielberg, it was Tobe Hooper. So maybe that would have been the actual one that would have actually worked out best, with Spielberg as a producer, Hooper as a director, and King as the writer. But yeah, kind of an interesting thing. Of course, down the road here, hopefully we'll be getting the Netflix version of The Talisman, which will have Steven Spielberg producing. So that will be our first connection of Steven Spielberg and Stephen King, two masters of their craft, finally with their names on screen for the same project. That would be interesting. Next up, there we go. And it is, what do I have okay, never mind. That is okay. Shawshank director calls The Shining a, quote, terrible Stephen King movie. This is by Anthony McGinn from the Digital Fix on February 24th, 2024, which is today. The article did drop today. I was able to throw this in here. So Anthony states the obvious and says we have had a lot of King adaptations over the years, and most of them are not as great as obviously the best of them. From the King, and this is actually from the King on Screen documentary, which we've actually talked about quite a bit. It did a film festival last year. It actually ended up getting purchased to get a wide release, or wide-ish release. Of course, documentaries don't necessarily get like nationwide releases, but it is currently in theaters right now. And it had it has a bunch of people in it, but two of them that were discussing this was Frank Darabont and Mick Garris, and discussing on why they think that King hates Kubrick's The Shining adaptation. So of course, it's Frank that gets the headline, but Mick Garris is obviously a legend too. He's probably not as well known because none of his stuff is to the same level of Frank Darabont's. But then again, I would say whose is. His is pretty untouchable. But Frank says it's a really good Stanley Kubrick movie, but it's a terrible Stephen King movie. And then Mick picks up and says, the creative personalities are very different. King is a very warm and human and emotional writer. Kubrick is a very cool and intellectual filmmaker. His calculating manner is in contrast to what King's story is actually about. So it's kind of an interesting thing to see, too. I mean, of course, Mick's done the most adaptations of King ever. Frank has probably done the most successful and popular King adaptations of all time. So it's very interesting to see them here, to hear them discussing basically, kind of what their take on King's hatred of the Shining movie. Of course, Mick Garris would direct the Shining TV series for Stephen King. So that was, he also has a unique insight because he actually ended up working with King to get that finally put on screen to King's liking. David again in the chat. What is Roland's favorite movie? Dude, Where's My Car? I mean and see the funny thing there is that makes you sound like you're a New Englander, and it sounds like something that Fran's dad from The Stand would say is my car. So that's great. Robert says, "Dude, where's my car?" Peter would have booed you. I don't know. Peter can get into some of those pretty bad jokes. He's all into the dad joke stuff. So I don't know if he would have booed you necessarily, but I don't know. Well, we'll have to throw that one at him at some point, and I'll report back the results on that. So next up, going over to odds and ends now. So the first one here is King on Twitter. And it is King tweeted out very recently. I think it was February. Let me see. I can look on the picture. February 19th, 2024. I forgot to put that down on my notes. But he's tweeted about Salem's Lot. Again, everyone keeps asking what is going on with this adaptation. Are we ever going to see it? I am of the belief we're probably not going to see it. It just feels to me like it got Supergirled or Batgirled. I'm sorry, not Supergirled. Batgirled. Maybe written off for tax purposes. I just don't. Maybe I'm being negative, but I just don't see that we're ever going to see it at this point. If we do, wonderful, but I just don't have a lot of high hopes for that. But he tweeted and says, between you and me, Twitter, I've seen the new Salem's Lot and it's quite good. Old school horror filmmaking, slow build, big payoff. Not sure why WB is holding it back. Not like it's embarrassing or anything. Who knows? I just write the fucking things. So I do appreciate this because if nothing else for Stephen King, I appreciate him not making it easy on WB on this. Like if I of course there's Stephen King fans that are all over the place. I see it on Twitter, I see it on Reddit, I see it everywhere where people are constantly asking like what's going on with this. And so I think there's definitely a hunger for this adaptation. So I just love that King is chumming the waters by tweeting about it to his millions and millions of followers on Twitter. Just basically saying like, it's not embarrassing. It's good. Like, I don't know why they're not releasing it type thing. So, very, very cool. Thank you, King, for bringing light to this. Hopefully they could just drop it on fucking HBO Max for God's sake. It doesn't even need, I would love to see it in theaters, but it doesn't have to be in theaters at this point. Just fucking give it to me. Let me watch it. Like something, man. I just want to see it. And then Robert says, I just write the fucking things. Classic King. Indeed. It got full on snark from King there at the end, but, do appreciate that from Mr. King. It's, something I want to have hope for. I've lost hope for it at this point, but if we were to get it, I would be very, very happy to see it. Next up, we have The Shining. We just mentioned The Shining adaptations, the Mick Garris version, I think most people would call this the Stephen King The Shining, is coming to Blu-ray. It got a Blu-ray remastered. It's coming out, and here is the details on it. It's got a new 2K restoration from the Inner Positives. Audio commentary by author Stephen King, director Mick Garris, cast member Steven Weber, Cynthia Garris, and select crew. 11 additional scenes, 1080p high definition. Of course, that is a 1.33 by 1 aspect ratio because it was on television, so it is not widescreen. DTS HD remastered audio 2.0 stereo, English subtitles, and that is coming March 12th, 2024. So, if you are a fan of Stephen King's The Shining, which we just revisited, I don't know, in the last year or two, and I don't think it's that bad, really. Like, yes, it certainly has kind of some of that 90s TV vibe to it, but it is a more true telling of Stephen King's book. Of course, it doesn't live up to the book because what can, but it certainly does better to King's book than Kubrick's film. Next, not that Kubrick's film isn't brilliant as well. Like I always say, it's kind of almost, it did make me happy too when I read that the Frank Darabont thing, because he says it's a really good Kubrick movie but a terrible Stephen King movie. That's a different way than I say it, because I usually say it's a brilliant movie, one of the greatest horror movies ever made, but it's also equally one of the worst Stephen King adaptations. Like, it's just so bad. There's very little that connect to the actual King novel. So very interesting there. So then King is scaring people on Twitter as the next odds and ends. Last time he was scaring people on Twitter this bad, he was telling people to microwave fish, I think, or something crazy like that. But now he is freaking people out in a visual manner, so anyone that is watching can see. He tweeted this out. I forgot to get the text for it. But he's, oh God, the screen, let me see if I can move this over, and it's his tweet says, look out, that is really small. Let me see if I can make this screen bigger. Of course I cannot. Let me try this. There we go. Look out, Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers. It's the Rabbit Man. And it is him wearing a very, very creepy rabbit mask, but it's like only from like the nose up. Very creepy. This is unsettling. I mean, of course, him telling people to like it was like something like microwave fish and put peanut butter on it, some nasty thing that he said. But you know, here he is terrifying people visually by putting on a terrifying rabbit mask. Probably the scariest rabbit mask I've seen since Donnie Darko. Let's just say that. And then next up we've got let's see. There we go. This is a funny one. King was tweeted out a story about him and Bruce Springsteen. There was a Graham Norton show clip that somebody tweeted, and it was Bruce Springsteen on the show, and he said something. I don't remember. It's been a while since I watched the clip, unfortunately, but he said something embarrassing where, like, you know, he kind of thought that it was about him, but it wasn't. And then King responded to it and told a very similar story. It's not the same story, but it's very similar. He says, quote, on Twitter, he said, quote, I was in a little New York City bistro with Springsteen just before Nebraska dropped. A teenage girl came over, stars in her eyes. Bruce reached for a pen. She never looked at him, and she said, "Oh my God, Stephen King." Bruce laughed his ass off, and I did autograph the thing. So, oh, that is great. I actually don't know. Let's see. I don't know enough about Springsteen. Let me see. Springsteen, Nebraska. Because he gives that as the timeline, but Nebraska, 1982. So yeah, that would have been I don't know where that's at in his career, but it is definitely 82. King would have been very well known by that point. Not to say that Springsteen wouldn't have been, but the fact that a young teenage girl was starstruck, and it was not indeed for Mr. Springsteen, but for Mr. King, makes me laugh, and it makes me happy, and I love it. So thank you, King, for tweeting that out. That's a fun one. And then let's see, next up we have Uncle Stevie Recommends, and this is actually an interesting one. There's an article that pulled something out of Dan's Macabre, or Macabre. I don't know how. I know it's Macabre is how you really say it, but I think I've heard people pronouncing it when it's King's book saying Dan's Macabre, which I don't know. Either way, Macabre is the word. But it's the this is not like a storybook. This is kind of like on writing, where it's a nonfiction, I guess, and it's King kind of talking about the horror genre on film and television and books and all kinds of stuff. And somebody pulled a quote out of this, and I felt like it could fit into the Uncle Stevie Recommends, even though it's written a long time ago. And he was talking about, in the book, he's talking at length about the movie X, The Man with the X-Ray Eyes. And that's X: The Man with the X-Ray Eyes. That's the name of the movie. And he says, one of the most interesting and offbeat little horror movies ever made. And it ends with one of the most shuddery, gross-out scenes ever filmed. So that to me, I mean, of course, everyone's mileage may vary. But for me, there's no higher the recommendation for someone like me than saying something like that. So yeah, I gotta check that out for sure. Next so yeah, that will do it for the Uncle Stevie Recommends and the odds and ends, and that brings us over to the Palaver section. I do have one topic I wanted to throw out there and discuss before diving into the bracket stuff. But the topic kind of came to me in the last little bit, and it was, I don't remember what triggered it, because I'm not reading the books right now. I mean, of course, that doesn't mean I'm not thinking about them, but yeah, just not being fresh in a read is very interesting to just have this thought randomly hit me, because I don't even think I was even that in-depthly thinking about the Dark Tower, but this thought came to me, and it is Roland's quartet. So I was thinking about the quartet, our main quartet, not the old school quartet, not Cuthbert and Alan and them. But we're talking Eddie, Susanna, Jake, Oy. Oh yeah, I guess I also got my Randall Flagg T-shirt on too, from Quartet 19, which is always great merchandise there. But yeah, Roland. So the quartet, I guess modern quartet, I guess is the right word for it, for the story. I was thinking about them, and I was thinking about how, and I don't think it's Roland that says it, but it's Eddie that says it in book 3, where he tells Roland that basically we're fucked without you, like we're doomed without you if you were to die. But he does say that, I would continue on. I would, go to the tower. And he says, I think Jake would, Susanna would go with me. He said, but we would be in serious trouble without you. This area, we don't. But I was that for some reason that scene came to my mind, and the thing that really hit me was that really in the larger extent of the story, the exact opposite is true. Because when we actually talk about like the Roland in the loop, and he's basically being judged, and as he goes up through the tower, he sees all these things that he's being judged for, all these times that he chose his mission over those people that he loved, so I think with all that stuff we can easily see that he's condemned via his choices, and I would say that when we look at the transformation of Roland from the very beginning of the story till the not even the end of the story, but when we get to June 19th, 1999, which we just mentioned a little bit ago. When we talk about that moment, Roland, if not for the dry twist, without the arthritis, he was fully intent. We're in Roland's head when he's like, if someone's going to die, today, it's going to be me. It's not going to be Jake. Like, we have that internal monologue, and I don't think there's anything given to us that makes us think that he's being anything but truthful. His intention is that Jake will not die. He does think he does feel that someone is going to have to die. That just feels inevitable. But he's and then of course his body fails, so Jake does die. But when you go from the Terminator that's at the very beginning of the series to that man, and I think we've talked about it a lot over the years, is the main reason for that is the quartet, right? You can look at like Cuthbert, Alan, Susan. You can look at some of these people that have had an impact on him, but ultimately all those people came before, and the man that walks into Tull and wipes everyone out, like that is the man that already experienced those people, right? So it's like ultimately it isn't until Jake shows up in that, and then the next book where we get Eddie and Susanna, and then the next book where we get Oy and Jake back. It's through that we actually start to see Roland transform. It's slow. I mean, we tracked it during the course of our book clubs, where it's like the first time Roland tells a joke, or the first time that, I don't know, we see this slow, almost melting of this like ice heart that is Roland. And we're obviously right now in our book clubs, we're going through the flashback to see kind of what made Roland who he was. So it's like, Roland is hardened by his original quartet and his losses, and the loss of his mother, the loss of Gilead, all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, it then comes around full circle with his new quartet, though, where they're able to help him get to a spot where, he's willing to sacrifice, where he is very open with them. He's very loving to them. He's no longer closed off to them. And it's like, ultimately, we know that, obviously after he goes through the tower, he's judged, he's sent back to the desert, to that opening line again. But I think that the thing that we see there then is he then has the horn. And it kind of my interpretation on it, and there's different interpretations certainly, and all of them are good, because there's nothing, it's not all written out for sure. It's left to us to interpret. But my interpretation's always been that, well, not always, because it's changed over the years. My interpretation is that ultimately Roland has to get to a spot where he is he chooses his loved ones over the tower, and I think that his last chance for that is walking through the door with Susanna, and he chooses not to. He chooses, the tower over his loved ones, just like he does throughout the rest of his life. But I think that we are so close in that moment of him choosing the right way, and all of that is because of his quartet. So it's like, while Eddie talking there to him in book 3, saying that like, hey, we're fucked, like, that comes down to like, well, they don't know the terrain, they don't know the people, they don't, it's all very like trivial stuff. But when you actually look at the larger, like, I don't know, like soul level, like God level stuff, like the Gan level stuff, the exact opposite is true, is that, if they were all to die, right away, especially because that's pretty early on. I think that's maybe just after, maybe is it even before Jake comes back? But either way, Eddie says it's in book 3, and I think that even in book 3 we see Roland change by the very end of that book, and I don't think that those changes had fully gone yet. I think there were still some elements of Roland, even when Jake first comes back and Roland says, I won't let you drop again, but then in his heart he kind of wonders to himself, like, is he telling the truth? Like, so there is some doubt with Roland as well in his own heart. But I think by the time you get toward later in the story, you get Roland fully solidified in his like commitment to his quartet. And so it's just interesting to me that it's like, ultimately, if early on there, about the time that was said, if all of Eddie and Susanna and Jake, if he had been drawn yet, because I'm forgetting exactly the timeline of where that conversation happens, if they were all to die, ultimately that would be the absolute fucking damnation for Roland. Like, he'd go through the rest of that loop, and probably be way worse off. Like, he'd probably be judged harsher. He probably wouldn't get a horn on the other side of the casting back. So I just found it interesting. I don't know why. Again, I don't know why random shit pops into my head, and I was just thinking about that Eddie line, and just kind of the larger view of things is that it's backwards. Roland's ultimate not survival, but Roland's ultimate salvation is in the hands of his quartet. So yeah, just an interesting thought I had. I wrote down, I wanted to talk through, because it's interesting stuff. Okay, so next up we have the Dark Tower Palaver March Insanity 2024. So first of all, I want to talk about the vote itself. So again, I actually just realized I do not have a slide for the dates. So let me pull up my old thing here, because it's the same every year. We don't care about the days of the week. It is strictly comes down to the numerical days of March. So the vote is going to be happening again March 1st through March 31st. So every day of March we'll be doing voting. The first round is March 1st through March 8th. The second round is March 9th through 16th. The final four is March 17th through 24th, and the finals is March 25th through 31st. I've been searching around online for as many different kind of bracketing places as I could, and ultimately I just am not happy with anything. So what I'm going to do is, and I actually did, until I started looking into doing it this way, did it suddenly dawn on me that this is actually how we did it back in 2019. Was it the first one? Yes, 2019 is what I basically did. Is I created polls on the website, thedarktowerpalaver.com. For each round, had the voting open for a certain period of time. Once the round ended, the voting closed. Get the brackets to the next round, started the next one. Basically, I'm separating the actual bracket part from the vote part. I was the last couple of years trying some different websites that kind of do it all for you, and it's a little bit more passive. It's a little bit less work for me, but ultimately I haven't been happy with how they've all executed. Last year, I was really annoyed because it was like made you do like the CAPTCHA bullshit for every vote. And I don't know. I guess I'm not into the realm of like, well, I only want everyone to vote once. Like, that's just like, whatever. I'm realistic enough to know that like, whatever. So in my mind, I'm just like, open it up. If you want to come on the website and vote 15 times, vote 15 times. I don't care. Everyone has the freedom to do that. So therefore I think it's fair. And I don't want us to be bogged down to have to dick around with fucking CAPTCHAs and that stupid shit. So what we're going to do is it's going to be at darktowerpalaver.com. I'll have a thing posted there for like round 1, and it'll have each of the vote things, each box for each showdown. Go through that. At the end of it, I'll go and I'll manually do the bracket, move the winners into the next round, and then what I'll do is, just like I did last year, I did a short YouTube clip video, 10, 15 or so minutes, where I'd come on and recap the previous round, talk about who won which votes, look at percentages, that kind of stuff, as well as then look at the new matchups, and I will do that each time. So again, when I so March 1st through 8th, so starting March 1st, I will have it posted. I'll probably get it pre-created and have it basically timed to where once midnight strikes for March 1st, the voting will be on darktowerpalaver.com, and then I'll have a video on the 9th, which is when the second round starts. I'll have a video recap and all that kind of stuff, and so forth. So that's how we're going to be doing it on darktowerpalaver.com. Go there March 1st through 31st. Vote as many times as you want, and let's crown the best. The worst Dark Tower moment. I am looking at the old one as I'm looking at the round breakdown. So that's how the vote's going to work. Baraki, hello. Yeah, indeed, as Robert says, long days and pleasant nights. So yeah, that is the how it's going to happen. So go to darktowerpalaver.com. Just bookmark that if you don't already have it bookmarked, and then just go on each of those days, and I'll make sure to drop the links in the YouTube videos and on the social media and that kind of stuff as well, to remind everyone. And that's how we're going to be doing it, and I'll probably be doing that going forward, because again, every bracket place I find is just, I'm not super happy with some aspect of them. So so I'm just going to go back to the way where it causes me a little bit more work, but ultimately I think it ends up being a better product. So let's without further ado then, let's go ahead and look on over at the bracket here. I will unveil the whole thing on the YouTube side, but then I'll go through for the people on the podcast side that cannot see and they can only hear. We'll go through each of the showdowns one at a time and talk them through, and then we'll have some preliminary predictions and all that kind of fun stuff. And also this is the unveiling. I've been obviously prodding everyone since the turn of the year into 2024 to get their nominations in. The nominations ended last night, so I went this morning, got everything gathered up. The other thing I always do on these is I try to make sure that the ones that have the heaviest nominations end up at the four corners, so that there will be no showdown for like the two most popular ones. Like I always call them like buzzsaws, right? Like think of like 2019 most hated Dark Tower characters. I didn't want Rhea the Coos and Cordelia Delgado facing off in one of the earliest rounds. That would be fucking stupid. So I have one on the top right, one on the top left, so that way if those two ever did face off, which they ended up facing off, it would be only be in the finals. So that's what I do, is try to like weigh where I think things fall, and then I kind of build the bracket based on that to try to make it as competitive, I guess, as possible. So without further ado, the bracket, it is on the screen now. So worst Dark Tower moments. Let's go ahead and start at the top here. Let me zoom into my screen a little bit. Is it gonna? There we go. So the first one of the higher ones for vote getting or nominations, I mean, is Roland dropping Jake. So of course Jake's second death, of course his first death is being ran over in the streets of New York. But I'm calling it Roland drops Jake because I think that just calling out through Jake's death by like, oh, Jake's first death, second death, third death, I think that's just a little bit too sterile for me. And it also somewhat absolves Roland of his evil of dropping Jake and picking his pursuit of the Man in Black over the boy that he doesn't necessarily love yet, but the boy that certainly it depends on him in a lot of ways. So, and that is going to be facing off in round 1 with the Crimson King reveal. So some of these, again, I left this open. It could be a moment you hate because it's sad, because it makes you angry, whatever it might be. There's any number of reasons. And so some of that is, I wanted it to be in universe as much as possible, but there will certainly be some things that become a little bit more meta, like the Crimson King being revealed. I think there's a lot of people that the general vibe I was getting, and I think I felt it the first time too, is the disappointment of the Crimson King being built up throughout this entire series. Not only this entire series, but if you're a wide Stephen King reader before getting to book 7 of the Dark Terror series, you've had him hyped up in other books too. You've seen him show up in things like Insomnia and I believe Hearts in Atlantis. He gets a mention, like he's mentioned all over the place. So to have this like big old giant bad, and then for him to end up being just this raving lunatic trapped on a balcony, it was kind of a disappointment for people, and maybe they were hoping for more. So I think that definitely works for this as well, because like I know that's a little bit meta, but it is also in universe too, because it's like we are ultimately readers, and it's like we love Jake, so seeing him drop is a thing we hate, and the fact that Roland doing it makes us hate it. And then for us to roll up and kind of not have the expectation completely fulfilled for the Crimson King. So that is the first showdown. The next bracket showdown is Eddie's death. Of course, that is a pretty big one for sure, but it fell just outside of the top 4, so I had to plug it in somewhere, so it's here, so it might be running into another heavy hitter fairly soon, unfortunately. But Eddie's death at Algo Ciento, that one was mentioned a number of times. Not at all surprising to me now, because we did do the most beloved Dark Tower character, and Eddie Dean ended up winning it. Again, beat Oi by 1 single vote. So I think that once I already knew that was already established, I guess I didn't realize until that fan vote back in 2022, I don't think I ever fully understood just how popular Eddie Dean was amongst the quartet. I know people have mentioned him in their introductory emails over the years, but I don't think I've ever really thought about it mathematically where it's like, oh shit, a lot of people love Eddie Dean. But now that I do know that full well, because he fucking beat Oi the Brave and most beloved Dark Tower character by a single vote, I kind of knew that this one, when I saw it show up as I was compiling all the nominations, it was like, oh yeah, this makes total sense, because Eddie's really loved character. It's second most beloved character, or no, the most beloved character, because he won the vote. So that one is facing off with Susanna Leaves, and that is Susanna going through the door to go with the Torin brothers in another level of the tower to have her happy ending. Of course, I totally see this one. My feelings for this have evolved over the years. I was angry at her for a long time, but now I've come to the realization that she's really choosing the right way, and that's the way that Roland should be going, because that's his salvation as well. But it still doesn't change the fact that it is one of the more heartbreaking moments of the series. I think that Roland, if he doesn't get into full-on begging, he is very, very close to full-on begging, and that is strange to see. This mighty and noble Roland taken down to such a level to almost begging Susanna to stay, and then her ultimately choosing the right and saying no. It's a heartbreaking scene. Even if she's making the right choice, it doesn't mean it's not heartbreaking. So next up into the next bracket, that's Eddie Dean's death versus Susanna Leaves. And then the next matchup is Rhea escapes. And that is not necessarily that she and I'll see you again next time, and she disappears away, but she ultimately escapes any kind of repercussions for all of her doings. King gives us the line that Roland would run into Rhea one more time. We can kind of take from that it probably doesn't end well for Rhea, but we've never had that story told, so most of us spent that entirety of book 4 absolutely loathing this creature, and to see her never get her comeuppance is very, very, very hard to take. And we're obviously going to spend the next couple years in the book clubs covering book 4 and dealing with this horrible creature. And that one is facing off with The Tet Leaves the People of River Crossing. This is one I was glad to see. I wasn't the only one to nominate. I threw it on there. And I actually, when I saw a couple other people mention it, I was kind of glad because this is a smaller moment. But it's a heartbreaking one, man. And it makes total, again, it's kind of like the Susanna Leaves. It makes total sense. And even like Eddie's explanation as to why they can't stay. Or even stay another night type thing, right? Like it'll just one thing leads to another. But still, it's just like for me, and I think I've mentioned it before, like I love old people. I always have. I remember being in grade school when we do like the angel tree things where you go and, the class would gather up money and stuff to like buy Christmas for someone, and I would always be advocating for like doing it for an elderly person. I've always been one that just loves old people. So the town of River Crossing, to see our Tet leave them, it is pretty heartbreaking. I was, again, happily surprised that other people mentioned it as well, because I thought that would just be a one-time mention that was just mentioned by me and nobody else. So I was very, I guess, happy, which is weird, that I wasn't the only one, because, yeah, it's heartbreaking, man. Those people, like, yes, they've lived on their own, they've done their own thing, but it's like, oh, man, you kind of feel for them a bit. Next up, at the bottom of the left-hand side bracket, we have Rhea inspects Susan. We just covered that in the book club. Very disturbing scene, very grotesque scene. Just everything wrong. Just on every level, this is just the worst. It's so terrible. Makes your skin crawl. Then when you get the understand the entirety of why it's happening, it makes your skin crawl even more. There's just a lot to hate about that scene for sure. It is terrible. And that faces off with another one of the buzzsaws, one of the heavy hitters on the four corners here. It is Jake's final death, which is, of course, Jake's death in Maine, 1999. Of course, there's a lot that goes on with this, and in fact, we'll see one in a minute that also is kind of tied to this. But ultimately, by this point, we're obviously pretty in love with Jake as a character. We spend a lot of time with him. We've gotten to really care for the kid. We are in Roland's head. We're Roland saying, I'm going to sacrifice myself. I won't let Jake die. So then to see Jake die is just heartbreaking. I mean, and then it's just a coup de grace too. We've covered it on the show where, King is so damn cruel to Jake over the entire course of this series. So just to finish it off in a way that's so tragic, it's tough. So yeah, that's definitely a big one. This is I'm going up to the other side now. We're on the right side. So that is the showdowns. Let me just run down that one more time. Roland drops Jake, face off the Crimson King's reveal. Eddie's death, face off with Susanna leaving. Rhea's escape, facing off the Tet, leaving the people of River Crossing. Rhea inspecting Susan, facing off with Jake's final death. That is the left side bracket. Jumping over to the other side, the first buzzsaw on this side is Flag's death. I would love to have this, because this was actually the second most, or this is high up there. This is like either the first or second most nominated thing. And there's part of me that would love to think that everyone's just upset because Randall Flagg is all of our favorite characters. My shirt, we all love Flagg. But I do fully understand there may be some Flagg haters that nominated this as well, because they may hate him in terms of a character, but they still, I think there were some people that were disappointed by Flagg's death being a little bit anticlimactic. There is no like payoff for like a big Flagg and Roland showdown. Although I would argue that what the fuck good would a Flagg and Roland showdown do when it was proven in the first book that Roland couldn't kill Flagg, like his bullets won't do anything, whatever. There was, of course, the fear in book 4. Yes, book 4, in the Emerald Palace, where he tries to grab Jake's gun, which is not of that world, and Flagg obviously had fear and ran. So I guess if Roland showed down with Flagg at the end, and he would have used the Ruger, maybe he could have killed him. But I just feel like there was already some stuff established where it's like I just don't know that, like, even if there was a showdown, if it could end the way that we would want it to end. So I do think there's some people disappointed by the fact that Flagg kind of went out, quote unquote, like a chump. But of course, I nominated this one as well. But of course, my nomination is because I wanted to see Flag live to the very end. Nobody wants to see Flag die, in my opinion, right? And Peter's not here to argue with me, so. All right, so that one is facing off with another one that connects to the Jake's final death, and that is Oi laments Jake's death. This one was nominated on its own a number of times, and I was happy to split these things, because while I do think the Oi's reaction to Jake's death makes Jake's death that much harder, I do think they are two very distinct things, and also the fact that Oi's lamenting of Jake's death drags on for quite a bit. I mean, all the way through the end of his life, really. So, I was fully willing to accept Oi's lamenting Jake's death being its own thing. So that'll face off with Flag's death. It's kind of like Eddie's death. It didn't make it on here, but Susanna's response to Eddie's death. I think Peter and I have talked about this over the years, where sometimes it's so much harder sometimes to deal with a death in a movie if you have to see someone or something react to that death in a way. And I think that's like the hard part of like where the red fern grows. Some of those traumatic childhood movies, right? It's like one of the dogs dies. So then it's all like you have Old Yeller too, where the boy, has to kill his dog and stuff. And that's bad because it's the kid. But I think there's like levels to it. Like if it was like an adult that has to react to something, it hurts, but not as bad. Then it's like a kid or someone that maybe is not mentally all there. That's even worse. And then you get down to like the level of like a dog or an animal. It's even worse. There's just something about that sadness and that stuff from the lesser you get down the chain of things, almost the worse it is. So, where Susan lamenting Eddie's death didn't get nominated enough to get on here, Oi lamenting Jake's death certainly did. And then that going to the next bracket is Oi's death, and one of my favorite ones that got nominated a few times, the booger eating at Algo Ciento. So that is Oi's death, of course, very tragic, sad moment versus booger eating at Algo Ciento. I think I mentioned a few times while we were trying to explain it, while I was explaining to people what I meant by worst moments, and I said that basically anything that gets some kind of negative rise out of you could really count, and I think that's where these nominations came from, because I don't think there's many of us that get to this point of the books that don't squirm a little bit, because it is pretty fucking disgusting. So yeah, that's that one makes me laugh, because it's just like 5-year-old King, man. He's like a 5-year-old kid, like the kid that wants to show the grossest shit to people, and like just totally gets a rise out of that. And the fact that he's a 70-year-old, I mean, he wasn't when he wrote this, but he still does it in his more modern books too. So even as a 70-something-year-old man, he still has that in him, that 5-year-old little boy in him. But yeah, Oi's death versus booger eating Alco Ciento. Next bracket, Roland kills his mom. And then one that was mentioned quite a few times, Fimolo, and Fumolo. There was a few different ways that people called that out. People call it the 3 Stephen Kings, the shapeshifter. There was a few different ways that people called it out, but this one was mentioned way more than I thought it would be. Apparently people are not a big fan of this one. So of that character and that whole portion of it there. So that is Roland kills his mom, and then Fimolo, and Fumolo. And then at the very bottom of this right-hand bracket, we have Patrick falls asleep. We all know what that means. Patrick Danville falling asleep, and not while he's supposed to be on guard. And then, of course, at the last buzzsaw on the far right bottom corner, it is Char Yu Tree. Very little explanation needs to be had there. Just one of the most tragic moments in the series. And yeah, so that is the breakdown. My predictions, like in my mind, I always look at the 4 corners and just think like, okay, it's probably going to end up being the final face off is going to be one of these 4 on either side. And so when I look at those, if I were to completely discount upsets, which I shouldn't do because we've had a number of upsets over the years here, so I'm going to discount them for this moment and say if it were to come down to those 4, That'd mean the showdown, if there's no upsets, it would be Roland dropping Jake versus Jake's final death. So 2 of Jake's deaths facing off in the final 4. That one's tough, man. I'm going to predict, and I have no idea, but I'm going to predict that Jake's final death will win out there and will end up in the final 2, and that'll be the champion on this left side. On the right side, Flag's death versus Charyu Tree. As much as I'm a Flag fan, I don't think that's going to beat Charyu Tree. If it ends up, again, no upsets happen and we end up with those 2 in the final 4, I do think Charyu Tree is going to beat Flag's death, although I would disagree. I think Flag's death is far more tragic than Charyu Tree. I don't know. I can't even say that, man. That makes me feel terrible to say. So yeah, I'm not going to go that far as to say that. But I will say that I'm a Flag fan. But I do think that Flag's death will be overthrown by Charyu Tree. So I think that would end up being Jake's final death versus Charyu Tree. Oh man, God, because the problem is, like, you got Roland's response to Charyu Tree. You see his reaction. That's like the more heartbreaking part. And then with Jake's death, you get so you've got those 2 responses there that really, like, just add like a force multiplier to those two scenes. God, I'm gonna say Charyu Tree is gonna be my prediction, and of course I'm not writing this down, so I hope I remember. But I do think that it'll be Jake's final death versus Charyu Tree, and Charyu Tree will win it. But that is discounting any upsets. So let me check the chat real quick, so I see some stuff popping off over here. Robert says you get a payoff with the dropping of Jake. You don't get that with the Crimson King just getting erased. Maybe Flanagan will tweak it. With most watching don't know the Insomnia backstory. And then Robert also says Charyu Tree was such an epic heartbreaker because you knew it was coming all along. Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, I wish I would have done a better job during the book clubs to, like, actually, like, nab the breadcrumbs, because there was even, like, breadcrumbs about the tragedy of the girl in the window into previous books, so it isn't just in book 4. But I want to, like, at some point, maybe I'll have to do that for a round table, is go through and find every reference to Susan or in the earlier books and see exactly how much we knew before we got even to, like, the early, because even in these book clubs that we're doing right now, the very early part of book 4, of at least the flashback portion, there's some of these things where I brought up in the spoiler section where it's like King is talking about, oh, I burn for you, and there's some burning references where I'm like, because King always says he writes one word at a time. There's oftentimes he doesn't know exactly how the story's going to end. So that if I take that at face value, it's like, so this is all coincidence, or he kind of knew at least that aspect of the end of this story, and he was dropping some of those hints in the early stages there. But I'd be interested to see how much do we truly know. We knew it wasn't going to end well, but my God, Charyu Tree is fucking brutal, man. And then Baraki says the scene where Sue's Mia is eating swamp stuff, and I think she sees a banquet always makes me squirm. I never enjoy that scene, though it is well written. That's actually one I'm surprised I didn't see many mentions of, because I forgot. I probably would have put that on my list too. I don't know if I would have been enough to move the needle enough to get it on the bracket at least, but that is a good call, Baraki, because yeah, that one's a hard one to watch. That one's hard to watch. I guess we're reading it, but that one's hard. That one's tough too. I'm also would point out before, because I want to talk about some potential upsets too, because I just made my predictions discounting upsets, but I want to talk upsets here in a second. But I also want to point out the other thing that surprises me is no Calvin Tower. Calvin Tower was kind of a heavy hitter on the most hated. He went a little bit further than he and Gasher both went pretty far. Of course, they both ran into Rhea and Cordelia buzzsaws and got bounced. But I was kind of wondering if some of the, like, whether it be Calvin backing out, because I know that causes anger in all of us when he backs out of the deal, even after Roland proves the note from his ancestor. So nothing from him. Nothing from Gasher, which is very surprising because, again, Gasher's fucking terrible, and some of the shit he does to Jake and Ludd is pretty nuts and terrible. So I just want to call those out because those are ones that came to my mind when I started compiling all this and I got it all down and I was looking at the list. As I started to look and realize, like, man, no Calvin Tower or Gasher stuff's going to end up making the bracket. That is nuts. Because, again, I think we hate both of them so much, and I mean, I guess Calvin, I guess I can admit, because we do get the payoff, kind of like what Robert was saying about with the deaths. You get the payoff with like Calvin, where he eventually does give in, but also you get like Eddie absolutely fucking destroying him. So you get some good moments out of his being a piece of shit. Also, in terms of like absolute fucking loathing anger is like him exposing himself up in Maine, by getting into the book bullshit there, and he ends up getting it to where they're able to find him, and Andolini and them are able to find him. There's that too that absolutely drives me to fucking like bloodlust. And then Gasher, just ultimately how terrible he is to Jake is pretty, is pretty rough. As well as, of course, we don't have, a vicious, Billy Bumbler attacking a boy on a bridge. That didn't make the bracket as well. And it's somewhere in my heart of hearts, I hear Peter yelling at me saying to shut up and, that kind of thing. So, upset wise, let's see here. Crimson King's reveal. I don't know that can really win over, Roland dropping Jake. Susanna leaving, I think, may put up a bigger fight against Eddie's death than we would think. I don't know if that would be an upset though. Rhea escaping the Tech Corporation. I think Rhea's the favorite there, and I don't think that one's gonna get beat by the People River Crossing. Okay. It's a buzzsaw one, but I will actually say if there's an upset that I would maybe predict in round one, Rhea inspecting Susan, maybe beating Jake's Final Death. I know Jake's Final Death had a lot of nominations, and that is one of the buzzsaws. But if that could actually be one I can see being an upset, man, because Rhea inspecting Susan is fucking bad, man. We just covered it in the book clubs, and it was not fun. Not fun to read, not fun to think about. Just everything about it's terrible. And I can only imagine what that's actually going to be looking like on screen. It just because Flanagan is good at making us uncomfortable anyway. He doesn't, shy away from things like the baseball boy. So I can only imagine, and of course it's not going to be like explicit. They're not going to be X-rated. Not that we would want it to be, but it's just like, but still, like the fact that you're going to be able to portray even subtly what's going on there is going to be very, very uncomfortable to watch. So on the other side, Flag's death being a buzzsaw, I could actually see this one being upset by Jake, Oi lamenting Jake's death. So the two kitty corners, bottom left and top right, I could see upsets in either of those. I can see Oi lamenting Jake's death, potentially beating Flag's death, even though Flag's death was either the first or second most nominated thing on our entire list. So, Oi lamenting Jake's death though, that's rough. That is a hard one. Oi's death versus Booger eating Al Gaziento. God, man, I can see this just because, like, even just reading Booger eating Al Gaziento is fucking gross. And then thinking about it is nasty, but there's no way it can beat Oi's death, right? Like, I would say, like, there's like a 5% chance that there's an upset here. Maybe that's even probably giving it too much credit. But Booger eating Al Gaziento is pretty fucking gross. And even just the wording of that's nasty. So, that one will be closer than we suspect. Roland killing his mom versus Femilo, Femilo, and Fumalo. Actually, that one's a complete toss-up. I don't think there's any... Because, I mean, seeing Roland kill his mom is pretty fucking heartbreaking. But Femilo, Femilo, Fumalo is pretty... some of the comments that were nominating this one were pretty heated. So, if people follow those people that nominated it to the extent of their hatred for it, that one could be a complete toss-up, 50-50. Patrick falling asleep in Charyu Tree, I don't see an upset happening there. So, let's see. Baraki says, I don't see anything beating Charyu Tree. Yeah, that I kind of agree. And that's why I said I think that's probably going to end up winning the entire thing. But then again, I have been surprised before in these. So that's a good prediction that Baraki. I kind of agree. Baraki also says if Roland's matricide was in a different bracket, I could see it going to the semifinals. Yeah, I think that, yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's just comes down. I will say, man, it gets actually kind of hard to build these things because it's like easy, like the first four. It's like, okay, cool. Get those four in their corners. But then that's when you start filling in those middle ones. There's just times where I'm like, God, there's just going to have to be times I have to make like really shitty matchups that are going to be tough that you kind of don't want to put like bangers against each other that early, but you just kind of have to. Let's see which one. I can't remember which one really disappointed me. Yeah, I don't remember, but it gets tough sometimes filling in those middle lines between those outer four. It can get tough because it's like, again, I want to keep it as balanced as possible and give everything that as the best chances they can. But sometimes you end up with too many like they're not necessarily buzzsaws, but they're heavy hitters, and there's just too many of the heavy hitters to where you're going to end up having a couple of them matching up. So, that's the bracket again. I can't wait for it. Again, March 1st. I'll have it posted on the website. I'll put it. There's like a timer I can put on to where it's like have this post posted this exact time. I will admit I don't know what time that runs off of. So for international folks, be patient. If it ends up being my time, I don't know, because it's like a website people like whatever, and I don't know where they're based out of. I don't know if it's gonna be Eastern time. I don't know if it's Grand Meridian time. So I really don't know exactly, but either way, March 1st, at some point on March 1st, everyone will be able to vote. Voting will go for a week for each round, and keep an eye on the YouTube side here, where I will have recaps, where I will come on after every round, recap what matchups happen, see if there's what surprises we see, if any. And then again, I'll just do little predictions. The videos are a little bit longer in the first video because there's a lot more to cover. But as it goes down, the videos get shorter and shorter because there's less to talk about. So that's March Insanity 2024. Also, I wanted to throw it out there. I am totally open at any time for people to send in nominations. I've created ideas for future brackets. I do have a list I have created. I already have a number of them that were nominated, or that people gave ideas for this year that didn't make it, that I'm keeping. But I want to leave the door open at all times. Anytime you have an idea for a March Insanity thing, shoot it to me and I will add it to this list. And we will keep this going annually, have some fun Dark Tower fan votes. So that is going to do it for the episode. Let me go ahead and get the outro stuff real quick. So if you do want to send in your ideas for a nomination, I will jump to the contact information first. You can email the show at show@darktowerpalaver.com. Again, show@darktowerpalaver.com. Hit us up on Facebook, facebook.com/darktowerpalaver. At Twitter, it's @darktowerpod. Instagram is darktowerpalaver, all one word. Blue Sky is @darktowerpalaver.bsky.social. And then also here on the YouTube side, if you want to drop tweet a response, whether it's comment a response, tweet a response, throw a response on Instagram for this post for this episode with your nominations if you have more for future brackets, or just let me know what you think about the bracket. Give me your predictions as well. If you want to subscribe to us, you can do that on any podcasting service of your choice. You can stream us on Spotify, Audible, Amazon Music. Show notes at darktowerpalaver.com, and that is where the voting will happen. So again, bookmark darktowerpalaver.com. You have all the fun stuff over there, show notes for this episode, but I'll have a individual post for the March Insanity round 1. That'll post on March 1st. So bookmark that, and then jump on over there and vote for each round. And let's see what is our most hated Dark Tower, or what is the worst Dark Tower moment? Not most hated. What is our worst Dark Tower moment? And then if you want to join the Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/darktowerpalaver. Again, for the Patreon folks, keep your eye on your feed. I'll have something dropping here very soon for that. I didn't do anything live, but I do have something for you guys coming very soon for the February release. And then on the YouTube side, if you want to join us here on YouTube Live, like everyone here did, Robert, David, Baraki, I don't know if anyone else spoke up or not, but I know we had a few other times where the numbers are up a bit, so some people are in here listening as well, which is totally fine as well. If you want to join, as everyone here did live, come on over here to youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. When you're here, like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. I appreciate all the likes for everyone that's in here live. But ring the bell for notifications. We go live every other week on Saturday afternoons. Go to YouTube. It'll show you what time it is in your time. For me, it's 2 p.m. Mountain time, which is 4 p.m. Eastern time. So that's when we go live. If you want to join live, you could do that anytime. You could go back and watch all of our old videos as well. Also, drop comments as well if you'd like. If you want to give me feedback on the bracket if you're not able to join live, drop your feedback there. Drop your nominations for future bracket ideas, anything like that. Comment section's awesome as well for all that. And that will do it for this episode. Again, a reminder, 2 weeks from now, a fortnight from now, it will be another roundtable because we're moving into the new month. Let's see, that will be on the 9th. So actually, serendipitously enough, that is the day that the bracket ends, for the first round bracket ends. So we will be able to discuss that on the roundtable a bit. I'll do a YouTube short video as well, but we'll have some discussion on that on the next episode. And then, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the 23rd of March is the book club episode, where we are going to be talking about the most our favorite Dark Tower moment in Dark Tower Palaver, March Insanity. We voted on that, and we ended up winning. With the one that I'm winning was Showdown at the Traveler's Rest. We are starting the Traveler's Rest Showdown on March 23rd. I am very excited. I'm going to try as hard as I can to see if we can get all of it in one episode, but I don't know if that's possible. But I am really fucking excited to do the Showdown at the Traveler's Rest. So in about a month from now, be ready for that fun stuff. But then, of course, I'll sign off as I always do here on the podcast side by saying long days and pleasant nights. All right, everyone on the chat, thank y'all for joining me here. Brock says, long days, pleasant nights, everyone. Thank you, Tad, for continuing to do this. Indeed, it is my pleasure. Thank you guys for being involved here. It definitely helps to have some people to interact with. I think if this were the old days before we ever did live streams, which was a long time ago, this would be a hell of a lot harder, because I would just be staring at a screen with no feedback of any kind. That would be really hard. So I'm really glad that we're doing all this live, and I'm glad to have you all here with me. It's so fun to have you guys as part of the conversation as well. And then Robert says, yes, Tad, great job. And then some emojis, some clapping, thumbs up, clapping, and then a A-OK sign. Thank you for the emojis. In spirit, they're still for Peter, of course, because Peter's love for the Emoji Movie, of course, is well-founded in the history of the show, right? And Robert's mentioning, is there any chance of tempting Peter for the Traveler's Rest? That's an interesting question for sure, and it is not something that I have not considered. So stay tuned. We'll see. I'm not going to promise anything, but it is definitely a big moment that we've when I started these book clubs. 8 years ago now, when we started it all, in my mind I was like, I can't wait for the showdown with Blaine. I can't wait for the showdown at the Traveler's Rest. I can't wait for the seeing CanCon Ray for the first time. Like, there's these certain moments where they're just like fucking big goddamn moments you just can't wait for, and this is one of the biggest ones. If again, I think Blaine may have beat it, may have been the first one that came to my mind, but certainly the showdown at the Traveler's Rest is usually a very close number 2. So yeah, so we'll see you guys in a fortnight for round table 148. I think this is 147 that we're on currently. So see you guys then for that. And then if you of course if you're joining the Geekery Abide show, that is later on in the day. It gives me a little bit of time to take a break between. If you are joining me over there, I'll see you there in a couple hours. See you guys.